AskReddit by Joshua. People who were adults in the 1980s, what does pop culture tend to leave out? The insane amounts of smoking inside. Especially restaurants. When I worked in a restaurant, the smokers, backroom dishwashers, cooks, got more chances to sit around and take breaks to smoke. When I got to office work, people had ashtrays at their desk. Often the ashtray was handmade by a young relative in elementary ceramic class. Anything we wore that wasn't neon. Pop culture acts like the 80s were just a sea of nothing but neon for 10 years. To get a good idea of everyday 80s fashion, watch a game show from that era. I saw some The Price is Right reruns recently and the contestants and audience took me back in time. This isn't specific to the 80s but the experience of boredom. There were many periods of time during the week when you simply had to sit there with your thoughts and be bored. This has been almost completely eliminated by phones, and I think it explains why attention spans are so fucked. I was a little kid in the 80s, but I remember panicking when I ran out of library books because it meant endless boredom until the next time I got to the library, which could be weeks since it was a long way to town. Reading everything, literally everything I could get my hands on. Cereal boxes, newspapers, magazines. Luckily my library was a bike ride away, but carrying those back on my bike was fun. OMG, you are so right, that reminds me of things I hadn't thought about in ages. I used to feel so very bored that I'd read anything that had text on it, from cans of food to cereal boxes, to whatever books, however insipid, I could lay my hands on. Even the necrology in the newspaper was worth a read. The internet really did away with the boredom, didn't it? Cruising. Before social media, we would drive up and down North Avenue, see and be seen. Stop at different businesses. The hicks hung out at the four-wheel drive store, the cool kids at the Walgreens parking lot, the jocks at the McDonald's. But it was a small town, so we would stop at all of them during the evening. That was our social world, along with keggers in the desert all through high school and for folks that stayed in town 4 years after high school. Shit, I did that in high school and the year after, and I graduated in 02. Except it was the Dunkin', Jamesway, and Walmart parking lots. What a mess it was to get cleaned up. That sparkle blue eyeshadow didn't come off easily, and if it got in your eyes it was Spanish Inquisition. That red lip gloss ran all over. And shampooing your hair 3 times to get out the spray and the mousse. I loved the 80s and I had a marvelous time. We could actually afford concert tickets. But it was messy, but way worth it. What about all the Aquanet? How long the 70s and 60s lingered in spaces in houses and offices and other people's minds. So much home decor of the 90s was really holdovers from the 80s. Real people are poor and fashion takes a backseat to things. A bunch of stuff in my grandpa's house car, 1989, were antiques from the 30s and 40s. Telephone glass insulators with a thick layer of cigarette smoke film, old stovetop clothes irons, etc. The thing about the 80s was that few people were living in those big split-level late 80s ranch houses. People were still in single-floor smaller ranches, maybe 800 square ft, decked with slant-wood internal siding, carpeted stairs, and macrame hangings for some damn reason. Lower income houses tended to be pretty dark inside. Lots of non-mainstream cliques and subcultures were left out. Filipino DJ battles, breakdance crews, and their homemade pleated pants. Goth and industrial dance clubs and their imported leather platform boots. Mexican shoulder hairstyles, makeup, and attitude. Very rarely there will be a goth club in a movie. The Crow has a good one, even with Thrill Kill Cult playing, although they originally wanted Nin. Columbia House record deals. I think I still owe them money. The obsession people media had about the 50s and 60s. Part of it was stuff like Back to the Future and 50s themed diners and baseball jackets being popular. Then there was the 20th anniversary of various Beatles albums, Sgt. Pepper obviously. I think the boomers at that point were in positions of influence and were looking back on their teens and 20s with rose-tinted glasses, so the rest of us had to suffer these cultural echoes from the generation before. Oh yeah, nothing says 80s like the 50s. Although, admittedly, Cry Baby came out in 1990. Wasn't quite an adult yet, but the mountains of cocaine that well-to-do people did as a party drug is staggering. Cocaine was cool. It's making a huge comeback. A lot of kids that grew up around people ruining their lives on opiates gave it a bad stigma, so they are trying out coke instead. It's weird if you look at the history of drug use, it follows the same pattern back and forth. The job market sucked, so there was a kind of undercurrent of tension. What the bleep is the future going to be like? Contrast that with, this stuff is so cool, early computer games, music videos, neon, big hair. Whipped back and forth between great hope and huge anxiety. Cocaine, AIDS, and the fact we all thought we were all going to die in nuclear apocalypse at any minute. The day after was some scary shit, and felt real. The cheap gas in the late 80s. There was a time when I had $2 and I rolled my truck into the gas station on empty. I pumped in $2 and had a quarter tank. $0.52 a gallon, courtesy of the Iran-Iraq War. For $5 I'd get a Mountain Dew, a pack of smokes, and still have enough for 2+ gallons of gas, which was plenty for my clapped out VW Rabbit. Edit to add the glass bottles with the styrofoam labels. Being a latchkey kid. No frequent communication with your parents. I can't tell you how many times I stayed out all night as an 18-year-old and no one but who I was with knew where I was or what I was doing. Life 360 as a parenting game changer. They didn't know what I was doing all day as a 12-17-year-old, either. You only called your parents at work if it was an emergency. Yes. Almost like a parent didn't care attitude that would be ascribed to that behavior now, but that wasn't right. Ma needed to work and that she didn't get home until 7 PM was just a reality. Oftentimes, she was gone when I got up and we had zero communication until she got home. I was just responsible for the whole spiel of keeping myself alive. Smoking everywhere. So much. Cocaine. Like, it was everywhere. The dude who used to deliver beer where I worked would just casually say, "You want a bump?" and we'd march into the beer cooler and snort coke. And that wasn't Los Angeles, or Miami. That was in rural middle Georgia. Lot of auto workers in Michigan too during peaks. The poverty. I mean, I know things are hard now, but we had it pretty damned hard back then, too. The judgment, as someone said earlier, was pretty hard, and it was very hard on folks who couldn't make their own way. That interest rates on mortgages was 15-20%. Women needed their husband's signature to have a credit card. Everybody knows about those interest rates. It is in no way comparable to rates of 15-20% nowadays. A study showed that rates of 5% now have the same financial stress as 17% back in those days due to how bloody cheap property was back then. I'd happily pay 20% interest if my house cost £50 lol. The 80s were crazy. One time me and my friends launched guerrilla warfare on invading Soviet and Cuban troops in our small Colorado town. Now you guys are all voting in matching red hats, like comrades, hahaha. I was a child in the 80s, but something that I don't think I've ever seen in modern pop culture retellings of 80s life, which I recall witnessing, is this: people think of the weird, wacky, fun colors and hair etc of the 80s like Madonna, Cyndi Lauper, Boy George styles, but for many people and mainstream communities, that was considered weird rock and roll character kind of presentation. People would often openly stare, laugh at, or disparage people who looked openly unique. It took a lot of courage to go out styled like that. It was acceptable to have a more subtle take on the fun colors trends. I believe the best real-time representation evidence of this is in the Cyndi Lauper Time After Time music video. There's a scene where she sits down in a diner with her boyfriend and his friends. She pulls off her cap to reveal her new hairstyle, half-shaved and unnaturally dyed. Her boyfriend's friends start hysterically laughing. The boyfriend is quietly embarrassed, and she runs out of the diner in tears. The homophobia. AIDS and 80s homophobia went hand in hand, and it's hard to overstate how much AIDS destroyed the gay community and how the dominant culture thought that was a good thing. Our rooms weren't decorated in neon pink and teals. Most of us had fake wood paneling on the walls. Deleted. Amusingly, line dancing is a thing in the last season or two of The Americans. Shoulder pads. Even men's suits, but some women's outfits were straight out of a NFL gear room.